The most convincing role I ever played wasn't on a stage. It was in an office cubicle, under harsh fluorescent lights, in sensible shoes that didn't make a sound on the corporate carpet. I played the part of a practical, content woman. I was good at it, too. I hit my marks, I knew my lines, the polite hellos, the enthusiastic agreement in meetings. But inside, behind the smile, there was a performer screaming into a pillow, a vibrant, passionate person who was slowly, quietly suffocating in the sensible, grayscale life everyone else had applauded.
That feeling of playing a part in your own life is something so many of us know intimately. Today, we're hearing the powerful story of Chloe Williams from New York City, a woman who had to tear down the entire set of her life to finally find her true stage. I'm your host, Susan Bentley, and this is Unbroken Women, where we celebrate the courage it takes to rewrite your own script.
My life was a carefully constructed fortress of practicality. On paper, I was a success story. A great job in marketing analytics, a corner of a cubicle with a view of a brick wall, but a steady paycheck that hit my account every 2 weeks like clockwork. My parents, who had worked tirelessly their whole lives, breathed a sigh of relief every time I mentioned my 401k. I lived with my partner, Mark, in a clean beige apartment where the most spontaneous thing we ever did was try a new brand of artisanal olive oil. Mark was a good man, a sensible man. He loved the version of me that planned for the future and made logical choices. And I tried so hard to be that version of me. Every morning, I'd pull my wild red hair into a tight professional bun, a daily act of taming the person I really was. I'd put on the neutral blazers and the quiet demeanor. I was good at my job. I could find stories and data, craft narratives from spreadsheets. It was creative in a way, but it was like trying to paint a masterpiece using only shades of gray. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this the prize? A life of quiet competence, of being perfectly, reasonably, numbingly fine? The weight wasn't a sudden burden. It was a slow, creeping accumulation. It was the weight of expectations. My parents' desire for my security, Mark's vision of a stable partnership, society's definition of adult success. Every compliment I received from my corporate achievements felt like a stone added to a pile on my chest. You're so responsible, Chloe. You've got it all figured out. Each word was a confirmation that the character I was playing was believable, and it pushed my true self further and further down. The real weight, though, was the silence of my own dreams. It was a constant low hum of longing in the back of my mind. A phantom limb ache for the stage, for the feeling of stage lights on my face, for the electric connection with an audience. I was living a life that wasn't mine, and the effort of holding up that facade day after day was profoundly, soul-crushingly exhausting. The whispers started subtly. They were fleeting moments of rebellion in my own mind. I'd be sitting in a monotonous weekly planning meeting, and instead of focusing on Q3 projections, I'd be silently running lines from A Streetcar Named Desire in my head. I'd see a flyer for an open audition taped to a lamppost, and my heart would do this painful little lurch, a quick, sharp pang of want, before I'd force myself to look away. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself on YouTube, watching clips of old plays or interviews with actors talking about their craft. I'd close the laptop with a feeling of deep, aching shame, as if I'd been caught looking at something forbidden. Once, Mark and I were walking through Times Square, and he was complaining about the tourists, but I just stopped, and I looked up at the marquees, all those dazzling lights spelling out names and titles, and I felt this overwhelming wave of grief. It was like I was standing outside the greatest party in the world, a party I was born to attend, but I'd lost my invitation years ago. The night everything shattered was supposed to be a normal Tuesday. Mark suggested we go to an open mic night at a little bar downtown. It'll be fun, he said, a nice, sensible weeknight activity. The bar was dark and smelled of stale beer and ambition. We sat in the back, and for an hour I watched people get up on a tiny, poorly lit stage and be brave. And then he got up, a young guy with a guitar. He was not good. He was off-key, he forgot the chords, his lyrics were clumsy, he was visibly nervous, his voice shaking. I felt for him, truly. But when he finished his song, something happened that I didn't expect. The room erupted. Not polite pity-clapping, but loud, whooping, thunderous applause. People were cheering for him, for his courage, for his messy, imperfect, passionate attempt. And in that moment, something inside me just broke. It wasn't about him. It was about me. He was on that stage, failing spectacularly, but trying. And I was in the audience, the successful one, with all this fire and talent and training bottled up inside me, doing absolutely nothing. The applause felt like a physical assault. Every clap was a judgment, a spotlight on my own cowardice. I was letting my dream die a quiet, respectable death while others were celebrated just for showing up. The realization was so stark, so brutal, I felt the air leave my lungs. Mediocrity was being chosen over passion, but not by the world, but me. I had chosen to be a spectator in my own life. I tried to bury it. For weeks after that night, I went into overdrive with my denial. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was romanticizing a difficult, unstable life. I made detailed spreadsheets of my finances, highlighting my savings, my retirement plan, anything to anchor me to the sensible world. I would listen to Mark talk about our 5-year plan, a mortgage, maybe a dog, and I would nod and smile, while a silent scream echoed in my chest. But the fear was a living thing now. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a constant, clawing anxiety. What would my parents say? They had sacrificed so much for me to have this stability. The thought of their disappointment was a physical weight. What about Mark? He fell in love with a reliable partner, not a starving artist. I was terrified of losing him, of losing everything. The biggest fear, though, was the fear of my own failure. What if I tried and I wasn't good enough? What if I threw away this perfectly good life for nothing? The idea of standing on that precipice, of leaping into the complete unknown, was paralyzing. So I did nothing. I just let the fear and the denial churn inside me, hoping, praying that it would eventually just go away and leave me in peace. The breaking point came on a Thursday. It was a day of 1,000 tiny paper cuts, a condescending comment from my boss, a mind-numbing 8-hour meeting about rebranding synergy, the realization that I had spent an entire afternoon color-coding a chart that literally no one would ever read. I came home feeling hollowed out, like a shell. Mark was out with friends, the apartment was quiet, and I was just empty. On autopilot, I went to the closet and pulled down a dusty box from the top shelf. Inside were my old playbills from college and high school. Our Town, The Glass Menagerie. My name was there, in the cast list. Chloe Williams as Emily Webb. Chloe Williams as Laura Wingfield. I ran my fingers over the cheap, faded paper, and I could smell the dust and the backstage corridors. I could feel the ghost of the stage lights. And then the thought hit me, not like a whisper, but like a speeding train. You have wasted your life. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was a sudden, terrifying, absolute truth. The regret was so powerful, it buckled my knees. I slid down the wall and just sat there on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of a life I had abandoned. And I began to cry. Not quiet, delicate tears. It was a raw, guttural, body-shaking sob that came from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. I was mourning the person I was supposed to be. In the quiet aftermath of that storm of tears, something shifted. The grief gave way to a strange, cold clarity. The fear was still there, a massive, terrifying mountain in front of me. But for the first time, the fear of staying the same became bigger than the fear of changing. The fear of waking up at 50 in the same cubicle with the same quiet ache of regret, that was the true horror. Sitting there on the floor, I whispered it to the empty room, just to see how it felt on my tongue. I'm going to quit my job. The words hung in the air, electric and terrifying. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a plan. I had no savings to speak of, no connections, no safety net. It was the most illogical, irrational, and completely insane decision I could possibly make. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my bones, that it was the only choice I had left. It was an act of survival. I was choosing the terrifying possibility of failure over the guaranteed certainty of a life half lived.
The very next Saturday, before I had even told a soul about my decision, I did something I hadn't done in almost a decade. I went to an audition. It was for a small community theater production of a play I'd never heard of. I found the notice online and walked there, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I might be sick. The room was a dusty church basement filled with actors who all seemed to know each other. I felt like a complete fraud. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the sides they gave me. But when they called my name and I walked onto that makeshift stage under a single bare bulb, something incredible happened. The terror was still there, but underneath it was another feeling, a feeling of coming home. The words on the page came alive in my mouth. For 3 minutes, I wasn't Chloe the analyst. I was a character. I was alive. I was myself. I have no idea if the audition was any good. It didn't matter. Walking out of that church basement and back into the sunlight, I felt free. It was the first breath of air after being underwater for years. Terrifying, yes, but exhilarating.
The exhilaration was short-lived. The moment I told my parents I had quit my job to pursue acting, the world tilted on its axis. It was a phone call I will never forget. There was a long, dead silence on the other end, and then my mother's voice, tight with panic. "Chloe, what have you done? After everything we did to give you a secure start." My father got on the phone, his voice laced with a deep, wounded disappointment. They didn't yell. It was worse. They pleaded. They threatened to cut me off financially. Not that I was taking their money, but the gesture was clear. They were terrified for me, and their fear felt like a judgment. Then came Mark. I told him over dinner at our favorite, sensible Italian restaurant. He listened, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He tried to reason with me, to talk me down from what he saw as a cliff edge of insanity. When that didn't work, he gave me the ultimatum. "Chloe, I can't do this. I can't be with someone who is just throwing everything away. You have to choose. It's this foolish dream, or it's me." In the space of 1 week, my entire support system had become a wall of resistance. They weren't being cruel. They were trying to pull me back to safety. But their safety had become my cage, and I suddenly found myself utterly, completely alone. The loneliness was a brutal battleground. With no one cheering me on, the voices of my own doubt grew deafeningly loud. I moved into a tiny room in a shared apartment, and every night I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the city sounds, and my mind would race. They were right. You've made a catastrophic mistake. I'd look at my dwindling bank account and feel a wave of sheer panic wash over me. Some days, the temptation to just crawl back was overwhelming. To call my old boss, to text Mark an apology, to admit defeat and return to the predictable, comfortable pain of my old life. The mental exhaustion was immense. It took every ounce of my energy just to get out of bed in the morning and face another day of uncertainty, to force myself to believe in a choice that had, so far, brought me nothing but loss and fear. I felt like a fraud and a fool, and I was at war with myself every single day. My lowest point came about 6 months in. I had been to dozens of auditions. The rejections piled up. Polite emails, or more often, just silence. My savings were gone. I had to take a temp job doing data entry in a windowless basement office. It was a cruel, ironic echo of my old life, but for minimum wage. I remember sitting there one afternoon, the fluorescent lights humming, my eyes burning from staring at endless rows of numbers. My phone buzzed. It was another email, a rejection for a tiny part I had desperately wanted, and I just broke. It felt like the final confirmation that I was a complete and utter failure. All that sacrifice, all that pain, for nothing. I felt pathetic, delusional. I remember walking out of that office in a daze, finding a payphone, because I couldn't even afford my cell phone plan anymore, and dialing my parents' number. I had the words ready in my mouth. You were right. I'm coming home. I was done. The fight was gone. I was raising the white flag, completely and utterly defeated.
As I stood there with the phone to my ear, listening to it ring, I looked across the street at an old independent movie theater. I had just enough cash in my pocket for a matinee ticket. On an impulse, I hung up the phone. I needed to sit in the dark for a couple of hours, just one last time, before I surrendered. During the intermission, I was in the lobby, trying not to cry, when an elderly usher, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Margaret, came over to me. She just stood there for a moment and then said, "You have the face of an artist, a fire in your eyes." I must have looked shocked. She smiled a sad, gentle smile. I used to dance, ballet, but life got in the way. I let it. Don't you let them quiet that fire in you, dear. The world has enough quiet people. And then she just walked away. That small, simple act of kindness from a complete stranger. It was everything. It wasn't a rescue. It was a mirror. She showed me what my future would be if I made that call. It was the spark I needed to keep going.
Margaret's words didn't magically solve my problems, but they did change my perspective. I didn't quit the temp job, but I stopped seeing it as a symbol of my failure and started seeing it as the thing that funded my dream. I enrolled in an improv class at night. It was terrifying, but it taught me how to be present, how to fail and get back up laughing. I started going to networking events for local filmmakers, standing awkwardly in corners until I forced myself to talk to people. I took a non-paying role in a student film, working 16-hour days for a reel and a cold slice of pizza. It was a slow, grueling climb. There was no single moment of breakthrough. It was just work. The work of building a new foundation, brick by painful brick. I started to find my people. Other writers, actors, directors, all struggling and striving alongside me. For the first time since I'd started, I wasn't alone. I was building a new family, one bound not by obligation, but by a shared, crazy passion. Then I got a small part in an independent film, a real one, On the first day on set, as I stood on my mark waiting for the director to call action, I felt a profound sense of peace. All the struggle, all the fear, all the rejection, it had all led to this. I wasn't the sensible analyst anymore. I wasn't the terrified girl in the church basement. I was an actor. It was who I was. The victory wasn't about becoming a star overnight. It was the quiet, internal click of knowing I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. My hair was wild, my eyes were bright. The person I had kept hidden for so long was finally, fully in the light, and she was home.
If I could speak to that woman in the cubicle, the one tying her hair back to look more serious, I would just wrap my arms around her. I'd tell her, I see you. I know you're scared, but all that passion you're trying so hard to suppress is not your weakness. It is your superpower. I'd tell her that the approval you're chasing will never fill you up. The greatest performance you will ever give is not for an audience. It's living your own truth, out loud. Don't let fear write your script.
Thank you, Chloe, for sharing that incredibly brave story of transformation. What a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. What is the dream you're keeping quiet? Share it with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. And if Chloe's story moved you, please like, subscribe, and explore another story of resilience right here on Unbroken Women.